Venezuela is a country on the edge right now, torn between two leaders, a president that most of the world, in the West anyway, has declared illegitimate, and the man who would replace him, riding a massive wave of popular support. We have new unverified video this morning from the streets of Venezuela's capital, Caracas. More unrest overnight, and this video purports to show people throwing Molotov cocktails as Venezuelan security forces. The military is still backing President Nicolas Maduro, but hundreds of thousands of people are on side with his rival, Juan Guaido, who yesterday declared himself interim president. Guaido swore himself in at a massive rally in Caracas, garnering almost immediate international support, endorsements from Canada, and even more importantly, from the United States. That action, though, has left Venezuela in a total state of flux, and what will happen today is still very much unclear. So let's begin our coverage with John Northcott, taking a look at the very latest this morning. John.
Yeah, indeed, Heather. Looking at specifically what role the military will play in this. Will they switch from backing Maduro? They have been very cagey over the years, being able to back the winner. Whether or not they do this is the question. That is what much of the world is watching. Also worth noting, coming across the wires earlier this morning, warnings from Russia. Officials there saying that any sort of international intervention would be a dangerous move. And again, speaking up, supporting the former, arguably still current, Maduro standing in power there. Guaido, a man taking, in a matter of days or weeks, many would say, now taking this and receiving the endorsement of many around the world. This, as U.S. President Donald Trump reacts as well and issues a warning. Have a listen.
We're not considering anything, but all options are on the table.
Does that mean you're considering those?
We're just, all options, always, all options are on the table.
So the U.S., the big military power, of course, but it's also worth noting Canada's support of Guaido coming along with a series of other countries. Canada, for several years now, has been part of the Lima Group, and we should say that Canada joins Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, Paraguay, and Peru. Now, the U.S. supports the Lima Initiative, but they are not fully part of it and not part of the presentation of support that we've seen for Guaido as well. When you look at a country that has been in crisis for years. We're talking about a 32 million population. 3.3 million have already fled the country, many of them to neighboring countries, although there are tens of thousands of Venezuelans who live in this country. 27% unemployment rate, 20% living below the poverty line. Now, the issue is often, when you look at why the international community cares about countries around the world, it often boils down to oil reserves. So look at this. Number one in the world in proven oil reserves, 302 billion barrels compared to 270 for Saudi Arabia and 171 billion for Canada. Nothing focuses the world attention like a tremendous amount of oil reserves, and that is what we've seen in Venezuela. Canada maintaining its non-essential travel warning for anyone who might think of going there. Levels of violent crime, unstable political situation, warning a shortage of medications, food, staples, and water. That is where the situation stands this morning. Heather?
John, Juan Guaido, we're going to have to get used to this name. What an incredible rise for him. Now, he has been head of Congress, but still largely unknown to most Venezuelans, even a month ago. Most Venezuelans, let alone the rest of the world. Tell us more about him.
Sorry, effectively launching this in about 3 weeks, this launch to power. But he's someone who's been in politics ever since university, going up against Hugo Chavez, of course, the predecessor, 35-year-old engineer, member of the National Assembly since 2016, and became an opposition leader. There it is, January 5th. That is how recent his accession to power there is. And someone, though, it shows the sort of pent-up anxiety around the world that he has been so quickly endorsed by so many countries around the world. As you say, Heather, a name we're going to have to get used to, and the people of Venezuela, many of them in the streets anyway, wanting to embrace him as their next leader.
John, thank you.
Okay.
Now, Venezuelans living in Canada held rallies right across the country yesterday in solidarity with the protesters back home. Hundreds attended this rally in Toronto, originally planned as a demonstration against Nicolas Maduro and the deteriorating conditions in Venezuela. But it became a celebration of sorts in support of Juan Guaido. Protests were held as well in Ottawa, Calgary, and Victoria.
Asumir formalmente las competencias del Ejecutivo Nacional como el presidente encargado de Venezuela.
That is Venezuela's opposition leader, the leader of the National Assembly Congress, Juan Guaido, as he swore himself in yesterday as interim president. The United States, Canada as well, moved to immediately endorse that move. Today, though, a spokesman for the Kremlin announced that Russia would continue to support Nicolas Maduro and called outside interference in the country unacceptable. There's a very important story happening in Venezuela, and let's bring you some perspective on it from Canada's former ambassador to that country until 2017. Ben Rowswell is with me. He's currently the president of the Canadian International Council. Mr. Rowswell, great to see you this morning, and thank you for the time.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
I want to bring up some pictures that we saw yesterday, just those extraordinary scenes of thousands of people gathered in the streets, those mass demonstrations yesterday. What did you see in those most recent protests that tell you what is happening now in Venezuela, and what, if anything, is different this time?
Well, the immediate reaction, having actually been witness firsthand to those kinds of gatherings in the past, is that this shows a remarkable consensus among Venezuelan people about the future of their country. When you're in Caracas and people out in the streets, literally by the hundreds of thousands everywhere, it's palpable that the people of Venezuela reject Maduro. They do not accept him as the president, and they showed yesterday they will no longer put up with him. What's different, I mean, there have been several periods of protests. Just in the time I was there, 2014, 2017, scenes like this playing out. What's different this time is that the citizens of Venezuela have actually identified another person to be the president. And so we're now into this highly unusual situation where there are two people in the same country that claim to be the president and the armed forces. There's a single armed forces stuck between the two, and the armed forces now needs to make up its mind which president will it be loyal to.
And that is a key, isn't it? I want to come back to the two-president notion, but since you've raised the military, one of the keys in all of this, which do the generals support? So far, they have continued to back Maduro, but in the face of international moves and in the face of these mass demonstrations by the people, are you expecting they will switch or change?
It's very difficult to predict how the armed forces will go. They're not only a highly secretive organization, they also are the most spied upon institution in Venezuela, where there's extreme punishment to any officer that expresses any criticism of the Maduro government. So it's not surprising that they're all keeping quite quiet. It's also quite surprising that they didn't react in any way one way or the other yesterday. There certainly was a high potential for violence. I understand there were some isolated skirmishes, but for the most part, the armed forces just stayed put, didn't fire, didn't do anything, just sat and watched. And so there is a palpable sense of expectation today, maybe tomorrow, that there will be some kind of decision. I should say that historically, Venezuelans armed forces have been remarkably adept at sticking with the side that it thinks it's going to win. It's a highly pragmatic organization. That's one reason why it stayed with Maduro up until now. But when you see...
And Chavez before.
That's right. And when you see, yesterday, when you see really the entire country, the citizens of the country, rich and poor, every single race, every single ethnic group, every single component of the society united in their opposition to the president, there are people in the armed forces that must be wondering, this cannot continue. We cannot continue to run a country in the face of the opposition of virtually all of its citizens.
Okay, so there's a question, who or if anyone will break ranks, to watch for, as you say, perhaps today or tomorrow. Back to the situation we find ourselves in Venezuela, with two men claiming to be president, one with the power, one with the legitimacy. And now we saw yesterday, very quickly, the United States and Canada and 10 other countries issuing statements supporting Guaido immediately and calling him the legitimate president. What effect does that international groundswell have?
So paralleling this remarkable degree of consensus among Venezuelan citizens about who their president should be, there is really a remarkable degree of international consensus as well. There were actually two different sets of declarations yesterday. There was the vast majority of Latin America plus Canada, represented by the Lima Group. We're talking about more than 2/3 of the population of Latin America coming out in support of Juan Guaido as the interim president. And then there was the United States, which, yes, also was declaring support for Juan Guaido, but also threatening military measures, which is totally unacceptable and totally different from what Canada and Latin America have been calling for. That, I think, is an extremely dangerous signal to send. It's highly unlikely that there would be any kind of invasion. I mean, it's even crazy to think about it. And yet to have the president actually say all means, we'll consider all means necessary.
Well, let me interrupt because we actually have that piece of tape isolated. So if anyone missed hearing that, we'll just play that for you now. This was in response to reporters' questions about what the U.S. response is to be in Venezuela. And as you'll hear him say, he didn't rule out military action. He said everything is still being considered. This is the U.S. president yesterday.
In an announcement about Venezuela today, some administration officials told reporters on a conference call that all options are on the table. Are you considering a military option for Venezuela?
We're not considering anything, but all options are on the table.
Does that mean you're considering those?
Which is all options, always. All options are on the table.
There that was. Yet, interestingly, today, Marco Rubio, for example, is talking about aid packages for people in Venezuela. So you have that extreme, and then you have Donald Trump not leaving the military option off the table. Does the U.S. have a legitimate plan here to go in and help in the matter, or what are you expecting from the United States?
So the words of the president are not the words of a friend of democracy. A military action against Venezuela at this time would be a violation of the popular sovereignty of Venezuela. The whole point what Venezuelans are calling for right now is for them to decide who their government is. If you have a foreign military taking action, that actually removes that fundamental democratic right. Now, the U.S. government and many others are planning for the humanitarian emergency, and I think this is the far more likely scenario.
Okay.
This is a country that's severely deprived of food and medication, and the very first order of business, once there's a government that's actually willing to accept international assistance, would be to bring that into the country so that you can alleviate some of the humanitarian suffering.
All right, and maybe in answer to that reality, the humanitarian crisis and the misery of millions, what do you think Canada's role should be now? Signatory to this, also, as you said, a member of the Lima Group, what can and should Canada do?
Canada should be part of that planning to deliver humanitarian assistance. We have been ready for years and years. The government of Venezuela has turned away food, even as its population starves, has turned away medication. So as soon as that changes, we should already have that kind of logistical effort planned out and ready to roll. There's also going to be a requirement for longer-term economic support. This is a country that's traditionally been one of the richest in the Americas, and so they'll have ability eventually to turn their economy around once they remove some of the economic measures the Maduro government has put in place. But that will require significant assistance from the international community and including Canada as well. And we should be planning that.
Finally, and if I could, I want to make sure I ask you this before I have to let you go. For Nicolas Maduro, it's unlikely, I would think, that he'll go quietly. We've seen him detain his opponents before. As the opposition to him grows internationally and at home, how do you expect he will respond now?
Maduro is the hardest of the hardliners in Venezuela. He has had so many opportunities over the course of his presidency to try and explore a middle way, to try and find a deal, negotiate a deal with the opposition parties in the interest of the country. He has consistently rejected that. And so the question isn't so much what he would do, since it looks like he will stay on until the bitter end. It's whether someone will tap him on the shoulder and tell him, Nicolas, it's time to go.
Ben Rowswell, a pleasure to have you on our program, and thank you for helping us understand this better today. Former ambassador to Venezuela for Canada in Toronto this morning. Thanks.